You're listening to LeaderCast, episode 100. Welcome to LeaderCast, Transforming Missions podcast with Tim Bias and Sarah Thomas, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
Yes, welcome to episode 100.
It's kind of crazy that we've recorded 100 episodes. Well, more than that if you include the bonus episodes that we did and the episodes that we recorded 2 times because of technology. And when I say technology, what I really mean is user error. Sometimes you have to, not sometimes, you have to hit the record button if you want to record something.
Sarah, we've talked about this before, but how cool is it that we've come to episode 100 at the end of the year?
Yes, when this episode goes live, we're standing at the end of the year, at the end of a decade, at the end of zeros in episode numbers. So something new is about to start. And
we all have experienced how starting something new can leave us feeling.
Oh, yes, we have. So before we go there, let me remind you that this episode of LeaderCast is brought to you by It Takes Courage, a 4-week study of Scripture and Courage starting on January 21st, 2020. It's one way Transforming Mission helps Jesus followers become courageous leaders. You can find resources for this episode at transformingmission.org/100.
And if this is your first time listening to LeaderCast, go ahead and hit the subscribe button on your podcast player so you don't miss a single episode. We might just surprise you sometime in the near future with a bonus episode.
Hint, hint.
And that'll be the only way you can get it. So while you're at it, we'd love for you to leave a positive review of LeaderCast on your favorite podcast player, or just share an episode with a friend.
So every time I think of new beginnings, I think of Revelation 21, verses 1 through 7. Here's what it reads. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the former heaven and the former earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. I heard a loud voice from the throne say, "Look, God's dwelling is here with humankind. He will dwell with them, and they will be his peoples. God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. There will be no more mourning, crying, or pain anymore, for the former things have passed away." Then the one seated on the throne said, "Look, I'm making all things new." He also said, "Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true." Then he said to me, "All is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will freely give water from the life-giving spring. Those who emerge victorious will inherit these things. I will be their God, and they will be my sons and daughters."
Sarah, most people are thinking about parties right now, and you're talking about the Revelation of John.
Oh, goodness. Well, what can I say? Let's have a Revelation 21 party.
Well, you probably shouldn't have said that, because did you know that Revelation 21 is one of my favorites?
I did.
It reminds me of hope, not wishful thinking, but it reminds me of new life and new ways. It's hope written in poetic language. I actually can imagine John pulling back the curtain of time and peeking around the corner and telling us what he sees. He sees a new heaven and a new earth, a new Jerusalem. That's poetic language for new life, a new order, a new way of doing things. He says the sea will be no more. That's a way of saying there's no more separation from the people that we love. They're new relationships. And this new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven is like a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. Again, that's that poetic language that implies new relationships, especially a new and intimate relationship with God who has come to live with us. I can see John pull back that curtain and tell us what he doesn't see. All the ways of the past that have brought disgrace and pain and separation, death, mourning, crying, they're all behind us now. All things are being made new. And in fact, I get the feeling it's like even new is new. I can imagine that we're looking over the horizon and catching a glimpse of hope. There's a new day of God's love for all people. Sarah, I can get excited about that kind of hope, the hope that John is telling us about. So, okay, let's have a Revelation 21 party, a party of new beginnings, a party of hope.
And you're saying to me, most people are having parties and you're thinking about Revelation 21? Okay, let's get started on this. So, Tim, here's my question for you. What new thing is God doing in your midst? And while I'm giving Tim a few seconds to think about the answer to that question, for those of you listening, the question's for you too. What new thing is God doing in your midst?
Okay, Sarah, just as I think about it off the top of my head, what I'm thinking about, if I put it in the context of what we just read, what you just read from Revelation, is that the old, which has passed away, is that I've had a whole career of communicating the gospel. And that's been by standing in a pulpit or behind a lectern, and I've been preaching and teaching. And one of the new things I'm learning is how to communicate the gospel differently through podcasts or through writing blogs, because one of the things I always wanted to be in radio. I've got a face for radio. You've given me the opportunity now to be a part of podcasts, and so we get to communicate the gospel in a 21st century way. Always thought I wanted to write a book, but I never thought I could write. And we discovered this whole way of writing called StoryBrand, and I'm learning to communicate through writing in ways that I had never done before. So there's some new things for me and some things that I'm giving up. I mean, I'm not giving up preaching and teaching, but the preaching and teaching comes in a new way, which is exciting for me. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was asking.
All right. Since I answered your question, what about you?
Well, I think for me, it's about us beginning to work in a whole new way. Maybe I'm saying the same thing with a different example. Here's what I mean. I've always been someone who has had a big picture strategy, if you will, of what's happening and what we're working towards. And I don't even have to look at a calendar. Like, I just know once it's planned, I know what's out there and it's in the back of my mind. But in the past, I've also found myself, more often than I care to admit, working from week to week because of the demands of ministry and dabbling in the long term, dabbling in what is down the road, what are the bigger projects. And you and I took significant steps in December to plan out 2020 in a different way. And please hear me as you're listening to this. We didn't do something different just for the sake of different. We planned it in a way that will help us to offer you, our podcast listeners, podcasts that will take the next step to offer classes and workshops and Bible studies to you in a new way. Some of that will be via new technologies, and in some instances, it will be new opportunities. And that's going to begin with what we've been mentioning to you at the beginning of each episode with It Takes Courage, starting on January 21st. So if you haven't clicked that link to stay informed about that, go ahead and do that as you're listening to this episode, and watch social media for the opportunity to participate in that. And so all of that means that I have to learn to work in a new way. And it's exciting thinking about, well, the image that comes to mind, and this is an old and somewhat worn out image, but you put the big rocks in first, and then the little rocks fill in the smaller spaces. That's what it feels like we did. And if I'm really honest, I've absolutely planned, but I don't know that I've planned in that way and with the intentionality that we did as we were thinking about 2020.
Yeah, as I listen to you explain that, I'm going to ask you a question you don't have to answer. How many times have I texted you, I'm excited?
I don't have enough fingers and toes.
It is something new, but I've been rejuvenated by this, by looking at a new beginning. My question is, what's that have to do with courage?
That's a good question. So here's where I would say courage comes in. If I can offer a personal example, will that be okay?
Can I stop you? No, I don't even want to stop you. Yes, that's okay.
I've got the record button on my end. So the real answer is no, you can't. So right after we did that planning, I had a conversation with my coach. And part of what I began to recognize about myself and about how I was even thinking about 2020 is, please hear me, I don't mean this to sound arrogant. It's just the reality of my world and how my life has unfolded. I've always been able to do things really well, even if I had to push it to the last minute. And part of that is because I will do whatever it takes to get things done and to have them done well. There isn't a complaint that I have in the world right now. So do I even dare say that life is good? Because life is good. But what I recognize through our planning is that I never even considered that things could be even better. And so how I would say it is that it's like going from good to great. That, yeah, it's all good right now. And I've said that phrase at other times, that what I was really saying was, yeah, this is hard, but it's all good. I don't mean it that way. I mean it. It's good. So the contrast for me of something new to something old is this. Even when it's good, have you considered that it can be great? And that, for me, requires courage, because it means I'm going to have to be vulnerable in different ways. If it's going to go from being good to being great, that's going to ask something new of me. I'm going to have to embrace what I say are my values in even deeper and more focused ways. I'm going to have to brave trust, and I know that there's also going to be that learning to rise. And so anytime there's something new, I think it calls forth courage in each one of us.
So what you're asking is, what's new and distinctive about the coming year for our listeners?
Yeah, when I say, have you considered it can be great? What's new? What's going to be different in 2020 for you? And for me, it's that good to great. That's the new and distinctive thing, and why Revelation 21 came to my mind.
Yeah, the vision that comes in Revelation 21 is something new, and John's contrasting the new he sees with the old he's experienced. So if I take that, I can say that we stand on the edge of a new year, a decade, and we're diving into a new 100 podcasts. The courage to celebrate something new brings with it letting go of the old. So let's walk through a series of questions that might help our listeners think about what's new and distinctive for the new year, for 2020.
And you can find a link to the transformation guide with all the questions we're going to walk through at transformingmission.org/100. LeaderCast Insiders, you get it automatically, as I like to say. So if you want to sign up to be a LeaderCast Insider, you'll find that link on the show notes page too. Fill that out once and you won't have to fill out another one of those forms again. So Tim, can you tell us what that first question might be?
Well, let's look back. And as looking back, what do you celebrate about 2019? And let's narrow in on that kind of question. What felt easy? What felt hard? What do you never want to do again? What made a difference in people's lives? Now think about that for a minute, because this is the only time we're going to look back on these questions. So we want you to really make it count. What felt easy? What felt hard? What do you never want to do again? And what made a difference in people's lives? So, Sarah, you asked me to get started. Do you have an answer to some of those questions?
Yes. So as we answered these questions, the relationships and being able, even in the intense seasons of ministry, that knowing that if something needed to shift, that wasn't a big deal. We could adjust and adapt whenever we needed to. And I think part of what has felt hard, and I think we've already maybe alluded to it, is we're coming to the end of a decade. We're coming to the end of a year. We're stepping into a whole new way of being. We've talked about this season that we're in terms of the 500-year garage sales that have happened in Christianity. And I feel like we're in the midst of that, and we don't yet know what is coming. We can't see the full picture, but we're taking steps to live into a new reality and learning new things, everything from the very tactile things like, okay, new technology, need to learn a new way of doing this, to just stopping and asking the question. And some of you have heard me ask this question more times than you care to hear me ask it. What does being a Jesus follower look like for people today, especially those who don't have a relationship right now with Jesus or with a church? And so there's this newness that, yes, it's been hard, but that hard thing isn't a bad thing. Does that make sense?
It does. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about what I don't ever want to do again. I think in our conversations and in the work that we do, we both want to make a difference. So I know that one of the things that we've kind of talked about that we don't want to do again, that's going to be behind us, is that we're not going to be caught in the processes and routines that aren't productive. And that's something that we've said that we don't want to do anymore.
Yes. Yeah. Anything else need to be said about that first series of questions and looking back?
I think we've put that behind us. Now let's go on and talk about the future.
So I think this second question is a fun one because it gives you a chance to dream and to think about what might be possible. So here's the question. What would you do in 2020 if you couldn't fail? What would a wildly successful or meaningful year look like for you? Now, you may need to stop and say, what does success look like? I'm saying that because I know a lot of us in ministry are like, well, success, we're not supposed to be successful. That's why I said meaningful. So use whatever word you need to use there and dream a little bit. Dream about what would you do in the coming year if you knew that you couldn't fail. And one of the things that we said is that we would host a 2-day Dare to Lead training, and we'd have at least 50 people in attendance. So what are we doing to lead up to that? We're going to have a series of workshops each month for an hour and a half starting in January to help you begin to step into that and experience what Dare to Lead is all about. So that's question number 2. Anything you want to add to that one, Tim?
No, I think you did really well. I'll go to question 3 if you want me to.
Question 3.
It's a two-parter. The first part of this question is, what does your community need the most? Which opportunities will best serve your community? What will generate the greatest impact for you? Which opportunities will help your community the most? So I think I just asked one question 4 times.
I think you did. So can I ask you a question about the question?
Yes.
When you say community, what are you referring to?
At this point, I'm talking about the immediate area in which you live. Now, I'm talking about where you live. We could also talk about communities in regard to groups of people with whom you associate. But with this, how best do you serve your community? What are the opportunities that best serve where you live, developing relationships with people with whom you live, work, and play?
Thanks for that clarification.
It took as long to answer the question as it did to ask all 4 parts of one question.
It's all good.
So what we'd ask you to do is to narrow it down, just to choose the top 3, 4, 5 opportunities that will be your difference makers in 2020. And when you choose them, write them down. This is going to be part of what you're aiming for in 2020. When we were answering that question, one of the things that we said was, what's our community need the most? We said courage. And so we've been working on how to talk about that courage and teach that courage and engage people in that courage. In fact, that's our work for 2020.
And you're going to have to wait to hear our 3 to 5 things. They're coming. You want to do the second part to question 3?
Do you need to think about meeting new people to address the needs you identified? And you think about it, what feels fun? What steps might you take to connect with new people? So that this is the relational piece with your community. It doesn't have to be so hard that you meet people. Make it fun. Make it a way in which, when you meet people, your life is enriched. How would that be? Go ahead.
Well, part of what we're trying to get at with that question is to think about the people around you and think about the people that you do have relationships with, as well as the people that you don't, but you might need to have relationships with. Because saying that you want to connect with your community and not doing anything about it, you're not going to connect with your community if you don't have a plan to do something about it. So that's, considering the needs of your community and what will best serve the community, and then how do you need to be intentional about those relationships that Tim was referring to. That's what question 3 is all about.
So if I had been thinking, I would have said, when you aim at nothing, you usually hit it.
Exactly.
So we want you to have a plan. What are those opportunities? Who are the people that need to be involved? Write it down, make it part of your prayer, and then decide how you're going to do it.
Question number 4. This one is about defining your boundaries. What are the things that you no longer want to experience? Yes, we're asking you to think about the things that you don't want to experience. And then, what are the things that you've been wanting to do and experience, but you've not made the time and space for in the past? Going forward, when you need to make a decision on how you're going to spend your time or what you're going to do, what's going to be non-negotiable? So when I said to you, for me, it's about going from good to great, it's really about setting, and even this question is about setting your priorities around what is going to get maximized and what's going to get minimized. That the things that are most important to you, again, use that metaphor of the rocks. The big things go in first. So how do you need to set up what your boundaries and getting clarity on what it is that you're going to focus on in 2020?
So when I just said a few minutes ago about if you aim at nothing, you usually hit it, that's where our question number 5 comes in, because we want you to declare your number. Now, I got to tell you, there was a time that I really was conscious about numbers and who was in and who wasn't here, and and the whole thing. But the reason we include this one is if you don't have an idea of what you're trying to achieve, you're not going to move towards anything new. If you don't set a goal out there, you're not going to try to develop a plan that's going to reach that goal.
Right. So you might say it this way, and I'm right there with you, Tim. I'm not a numbers person. I'll just say it. I'll own it. I'll claim it. It's not about the numbers. It's about the difference that you're going to make. So here's how you might say it. How many people do you want to make a difference to in 2020? And what difference do you want to make in their life in 2020? So, for example, I gave you the example of we want to reach 50 people and have 50 people in a 2-day seminar. So when we say that, it's not about the number 50. We might end up having 20 or 10. There might be a small group of 5 or 6, and it will be just as good. But wanting to reach 50 people causes me and us to stop and think in a different way. Because if it's not just, okay, whoever comes, comes, but we're going to be intentional about working towards that, we're going to have to think in different ways. So that's one example of why we're asking you to declare your number. What are a few more ideas, Tim?
Well, you might say, I want to help 12 people get connected to Jesus and to a local church. I mean, it's easy to say we want new people. We want to connect with people. If you say 12, get connected to Jesus and or to a local church, what would be the harm if you sat down and began to name some people that you know and you made them part of your prayer life and that you were intentionally then inviting them?
Are you jumping to question 6 already?
I might be. Let me give you some other examples here, which I'll keep jumping ahead. You might say you want to help 35 people know the scriptures in deeper ways. So figure out not only what you're going to teach, but who are those 35 people you'd want to invite. You might say you want 100 people from the community to know they're loved by God. Well, who are those 100 people? Where do they live? How would you make those connections? I like this one. You might want to show gratitude for the people who keep your community safe. You want to show gratitude for the educators in your community. You can say that. How much work is it to go to the police station or to make contact with the principal of the community?
So, Tim, you're identifying question number 6. Once you've named what your number is, you've got to figure out how are you going to get there. You've got to identify what are those steps that are going to take you there. So let's say you want to help 12 people get connected with Jesus and the local church. Tim, you already said it. Who are they? And if you don't know who they are, how are you going to meet people who don't know Jesus? And once you meet them, how are you going to nurture the relationship that you have with them? Because if you jump from meeting them to, hey, I want to introduce you to Jesus, most people, you're not going to get very far. It's just not going to happen. That's going to take time. So going back to something we've mentioned before, in terms of boundaries, what needs to happen on your calendar to make this a priority? And again, you can't see my air quotes on this one, but what does success look like? What does connecting with Jesus and the local church look like? Define it. And then work backwards from there to build the steps that will take you to that place of building the relationships and deepening the relationships so that you come to the place that you can help people be introduced to Jesus and to a local church. But if you don't know what it is that means and what that looks like for you, I've heard people say that, and what they have meant is they want to have an opportunity to give 12 people a Bible. And that's connecting to Jesus for them. That's what they've meant. For other people, it means that they're related to a community and have taken a first step of saying, yes, I believe in Jesus. And if they haven't been baptized, that they make a commitment to be baptized. And other people are saying, yeah, there's that, but then I want them to get connected to a Christian community and I want them to continue growing in their relationship. So what does that look like? Now, I'm not trying to define what your number is. I'm giving you an example of what can be and what you need to do to do the work so that you can take the steps in the new year to work towards what you're trying to achieve.
So, Sarah, you've already helped me pull back the curtain and know what I need to leave behind, and that is I'm always trying to jump ahead to how you're going to get it done before I set the goal. So here's what we usually do. We just usually say, we want to reach more people. And who doesn't?
Right.
But without thinking about who you're trying to reach and how you're going to connect with them, you're not going to do anything.
Right. It's a nice idea. It's not, or it's a casual conversation or something that you think that you should say. It's not going to happen. So we're trying to help you get specific about what are the steps that you're going to take in the new year. You want to round out the last three questions for us, Tim?
Well, one of the things, Sarah, I think that you would agree with me that really helped us in our planning was that we actually put things on the calendar to make possible what we were going to do to move forward. So the question is, what needs to go on the calendar to make possible what you're wanting to accomplish? Map it out, put it on the calendar. And what we know is what gets scheduled gets done. I mean, I can tell you that with somebody that says, oh, we need to have lunch sometime. Well, I haven't had lunch with them.
Right.
It's only when we say, let's calendar a day, let's get a time to have lunch, and we put it down.
Right.
So it's kind of, that's a kind of a silly example, but that's what that is. Question number 8 is just do a gut check. What's your gut saying? How do you really feel about it?
Yeah, so let me just offer what happened when we got to this question. I'll speak for myself, and then Tim, you can add anything that I might not say. When we got to this point, I know for me, I was excited because there were some things that we had talked about around the edges and some things that I had even been thinking about and had even penciled in on a calendar, but I mean, it was just me. We hadn't had any conversation about it. And when we got to the question of do a gut check and what's your gut saying, if I'm really honest, my gut was doing somersaults, but it was an excited somersault. And so what's your gut saying to you? And oh, hint, 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 you've heard us talking about rumbling with vulnerability. Just because my gut was doing somersaults, and that would have been an easy place for me to say, ooh, something's wrong here. No, My gut was doing somersaults because I knew what it meant was it was inviting us to be courageous in how we were going to lead in 2020. And so because I'm aware of what that somersault feels like in my stomach, I can do that gut check and know what it means. So do a gut check on your gut check is what or let me say that differently. Do a head check on your gut check and make sure you really know what you're feeling and what that feeling is all about, and step into courage and step towards courage instead of stepping away from it.
And not that the other questions aren't important, but this one might be the most important. And that is, who do you need to be to make what you've outlined possible? This is where those skills of being courageous come into play.
Yeah,
because we really, there are lots of times that this is where the rubber hits the road. It's just who we are and how we're going to live into our new day.
Right. And that's the question that for me led me to the place of saying, okay, it's time to level up. 2020 is going to be the great year, not just the good year. And so if you're feeling excited but a bit overwhelmed, I would say to you again, good, because you're rumbling with vulnerability. So stay there in that place and rumble with what you're feeling. For the old things to pass away and for the new things to come, it requires courage. So if this is your first episode with us, you may not have heard this before. If you haven't read any of Brené Brown, you may not have heard it before. But if you've been listening to us for a while, you might want to say the 4 skills of courage with us. So Tim, will you remind us of what the 4 skill sets are?
Here are the 4 skills, the 4 skill sets: rumbling with vulnerability, living into your values, braving trust, and learning to rise.
So as you work through those 9 questions that we've outlined for you, as you hold in mind Revelation 21, here's your reminder for the new year with new things. If we're brave enough, often enough, we will fall. And that's a quote from Brené Brown. The 4 skill sets of courage will help you get back up again. They'll help you write a new story. But before you ever get there, pay attention to what's going on in your body. And when you get to question 7 and that gut check that I was talking about, it's going to be easy to go back to the old ways. What's quote unquote normal is always easier, even if it's stressful, because it doesn't require us to change. But God's doing a new thing in you. And because God is already with you, my question is, what's your next move? And that's going to be another place where courage is going to come in. So here's one last question, and it may have needed to be the first question. Are you going to be brave and explore the new thing God is doing in your midst for 2020? Yes or no? That's all you have to answer. Maybe you already have. We'd love to celebrate your new beginnings. So send us an email at connect@transformingmission.org or let us know inside our Facebook group. And if you're not a part of that Facebook group, look for a link on the show notes page to become a part of the Facebook group. So Tim, you want to wrap up this episode for us?
All I'm thinking is that if we go back to John and John pulls back the curtain, he is talking to a group of people who have been in chaos. Sometimes things have gone well, but for the most part, they feel like that maybe they're ready to step into a new day. All he's doing is offering them the hope and the courage to do it. He pulls it back and says, listen, all the bad stuff's behind us. All the stuff that's been holding us back is behind us. Everything new is in front of us. And it's kind of like he's saying, let's go for it. So that's kind of where I feel like we are. And that's what we've done today, inviting our listeners into something new. Let's go for it.
So celebrate. That's what I hear you saying. Have a party. It's the end of a decade, end of the year. We've broken into the hundreds on LeaderCast. God is doing a new thing. Do you perceive it? If so, go lead a movement of Jesus followers. Happy New Year. Bye for now.